Friends, today I want to talk about death and life and vultures. Let's get into it. Friends, welcome back to Heartscapes, where we're exploring the system of Reiki to live lives that are rooted, spacious, connected, and that to help us remember ourselves. My name is Michaela. Welcome back to the studio. So, friends, have you ever played that game, Two Truths and a Lie, where you're meeting people for the first time and you tell them two things about yourself that are true and one thing that is a made up lie, and they need to guess which one is the lie? Well, whenever I play that game, one of the truths that I always include is the fact that I used to work as a tattoo artist. There was a time far back in my youth that I imagined myself making a career of the art of inscribing images on people's bodies. That dream didn't come to pass. Things transitioned as they often do on a life's path, and I let that go as a profession. However, my identity as a collector of tattoos has remained consistent over my life. And, at this point, I think I'm actually approaching almost 50% coverage of my body in ink, which is hard to tell when you only see me from this perspective. So you'll have to take my word for it. I'm in the process of working on redoing my back piece. So my entire back is getting worked on. And as you can see, there are now wings across my back. And for the most part, that is mostly what people can see of this particularly epic back piece. Most of my clothing covers most of it. You just see the wings popping out. So people often ask, is that an eagle? Is it a hawk? No, it's a vulture. Why in the world would I tattoo an enormous vulture on my back? Often this animal is not necessarily seen as the most elegant or regal or aesthetically beautiful animal, but I disagree. I find the vulture to be all of these things and much more. And that's what I wanted to talk about today, because the themes of the cycles of life are very strong within the system of Reiki and within the way that I approach my practice with the system of Reiki. And oftentimes, what is being emphasized in my teaching and in my practice is the life half of that cycle. We talk about the spark of life that is in our center, that we draw our attention to and expand to get a sense of the radiance of our own life force. We talk about the web of life that we are intrinsically connected to, one tiny spark, one tiny intersection on that web of life that is connected with the fullness of life. And all of these things are inherent and very, very important to the mindsets, the worldview, the perspectives of the system of Reiki. And there's an aspect of this that really must be talked about. And I think it in particular needs to be talked about here in our modern Western society, because it is something that we tend to avoid. And that is that the cycle of life must and of course includes the cycles of death as well. This is a complex topic and one that really shows up in so many different aspects of my life and of my teaching. And so in this conversation, I'm attempting to kind of distill down some key points. So I'm going to try not to ramble here too much. But it is something that I keep returning to as a really essential part of we as humanity reclaiming not only our place in the web of life, but our identity as a contributing member of the animal kingdom that aligns with goodness, with sustainability, with life in ways that our species has not for a very, very long time. You see, at some point in our evolution, with these unique minds and brains that we have, that allows ourselves a level of self-consciousness that does not seem to be present in other animals. At some point, we began trying to opt out of the cycles of life. What I mean by that is that we're able to create technologies and we're able to use our cleverness to bypass certain aspects of the challenges of life that all living beings are really subjected to. We've used technologies to access foods out of season, to ship them all over the world in a way that has been devastating to the environment. We opt out of the cycles of night and day by beginning our workday well before the sun is up or well after the sun is down, even manipulating our concept of time with the daylight savings time cycle. Today is the first day of the spring forward change in the daylight savings cycle. And I'm telling you, it messed me up this morning. Maybe it got you too. So we're opting out of that cycle. We create environments inside of our homes that can manipulate the season so that we can experience comfort year round and not be subjected to the extremes of the weather outside of our spaces. And we relate to the very fundamental reality of death in ways that cause us psychological, emotional, and environmental harm. And I truly see this as something that needs to be addressed and that brings us great healing as individuals and as communities when we do. We tend to be very death avoidant as a society. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to be around it. We want to move the elderly and the dying out of our view and give that over to professionals whose realm it is to work with the realm of dying. We want to avoid the grieving cycle. We want to contain it into distinct packages, into specific periods of time, rather than acknowledging the grieving cycle as something that stays with us for a long time and that needs to breathe and to move through our bodies. We even want to package our actual physical body once we have left it in the spirit form. We want to package our body in a way that weirdly preserves it, but at the same time poisons the body and the earth that we bury our bodies into by embalming and packing our bodies with formaldehyde and other kinds of very bizarre chemicals. To what end? To prevent our body from decaying? To make us look more presentable at our funeral? I'm not quite sure what the purpose of that is, but I know that the outcome is that graveyards, cemeteries tend to be some of the most toxic land in a city because of the constant influx of those chemicals. And in doing this, this is yet another way in which we seem to be attempting to opt out of the natural cycles of nature, to declare ourselves to be somehow different than the natural world, somehow better, somehow distinct, that our bodies don't have to be given back to the earth to be composted properly, to give the nutrients, give the gifts of this earth that we have received to build our bodies, to give them back to the earth the way that every other living being does. In the fall, when the trees begin to lose their leaves, when that part of them dies and goes down to the ground, the natural order of things is that those leaves decay. They turn back into soil. They give nutrients back into the soil that feeds the tree so that that cycle of life can continue. What do we tend to do in our cities? We tend to rake those leaves up, put them in trash bags, into plastic, send them off to the dump where they become, again, weirdly embalmed in that plastic casing. And we deny that cycle of life wherein the leaves go back into the soil to nourish the cycle. In so many different ways, all over our human experience in the modern world, we're interrupting the cycle of life. We're interrupting the cycle of death. We're clearing death away, moving it out of sight in a way that does not allow that full cycle to proceed. This is a cycle of existence that has been with this earth from the beginning. It's a cycle that we are intrinsically a part of, and yet we interrupt it at every turn. It's, in a sense, this might be a weird way of putting it. This is just what's coming to me. But by fully participating in the dying part of the cycle, is actually how we achieve what you might consider everlasting life. I don't know what I think about the concept of reincarnation spiritually. I don't feel particularly connected with that idea, but I absolutely am connected to the idea of the physiological reincarnation of life that happens when something dies, is composted, decays, bioremediates, and is given back to the cycle in a form that is usable by the next round of life. That to me is immortality. That's where we experience reincarnation, regardless of what's happening with our mind or our spirit or our soul. I don't have an opinion on what happens to those parts of ourselves. I haven't had an experience that gives me any definitive answer. And frankly, I don't need one. I'm not grasping for that answer. I'm not looking for the answer of what happens to my soul when I die, because I feel so deeply connected and satisfied with what I can observe of what will happen to my being, to my body, to the physical stuff of me when I die. In a sense, much of my personal spiritual path and what I see made available to us in the system of Reiki, when practiced from the perspective of its Shinto origins, Shinto, the nature-based Japanese indigenous practices that are fully connected to and reflective of that natural cycle of life. What I see made available to us in that is a pathway to be settled in our place in that cycle of life, to re-enter the cycles of nature in ways that humanity has attempted to opt out of for centuries. I really do believe, because I've observed it in myself and in others, that much of the dis-ease that we experience as a species is related to, if not completely rooted in, this disconnection from those cycles of life. It's caused such a sense of dissonance in our mindset, in our psyche, this irreparable sense of dislocation from our natural place in the world that we keep trying to resolve and trying to fix with processes and experiences outside of ourselves, with products, with all of these trappings that we create to help us feel like we belong again, when in reality we've always belonged. And it's us that has created the conditions that make us feel that we do not belong in this world. Our spiritual practice should be something that reconnects us to our place in this world, that reconnects us into a sense of the vastness of the cycles of life that have sustained life forever, to allow us to ease back into that place, to relieve the tension of striving to find a home when our home is here all along. It's us who left. And it's here that nature is our best and greatest teacher. And it's here that the vulture comes into our story. The vulture, again, an animal so intrinsically associated with death, a bird that eats the rotting dead bodies that accumulate on this world, the carrion eaters, often are seen with derision, with fear, with humor. They're often the butt of jokes in many a Disney film. But rarely are they seen with reverence. Rarely are they seen as the sacred beings that they are, holding an absolutely essential and sacred position in the cycle of life, as do all of the composting beings on this world. Many, many, many animals and fungi and plants and bacteria that are tasked with taking the dead, deconstructing them, bringing them back to the raw materials, the raw stuff of life, and reverently giving that back into the cycle. I often use the term bioremediation, which comes from environmental regeneration practices. And it simply means using the energy within a system to break down toxins and poisons within that system, rendering them inert and giving them back as energy into the system, facilitating that cycle of life. And that is exactly what vultures and other decomposers do. So with the vulture, we see many amazing adaptations that nature has developed within this being to allow them to do a job that almost nobody else can do, to consume what would otherwise be poison to most other animals, to most other beings, but to take that in as nourishment. And in doing so, cleanse, clear the landscape of these poisons. I mean, we don't have to think too hard about what it would be like if there was nothing that cleaned up the dead in the landscape. It would be a pretty toxic environment to move through. And yet, every day, there are beings in this world that are cleansing this world for other beings to live in. In the vulture, you see these incredible adaptations. They have a very high acid content in their stomach, so they can just right away begin to kill pathogens in that food that are normally left alive inside of a person's system to poison it. Further down in the digestive tract, they have a microflora relationship with bacteria, like all animals do. There's microorganisms in our gut that, when we're in good balance, that help to aid our digestion. And in the vulture, those specific microorganisms are very similar biologically to the poisonous bacteria in rotting food. So they're not dangerous to the bird, but they're similar enough that the bird becomes accustomed to their presence and is therefore not as impacted, not poisoned by those other bacteria as they're moving through the digestive system. This is possibly getting way too biologically detailed for what you signed up for watching this video. But I really do geek out on these things, right? What are the biological mechanisms that allow a being to do its job in the world? We can also look at the behavior of the vulture. And this is something that is often observed with confusion by many people. Perhaps you've seen it, a vulture sitting high up on a post or in the top of a tree with its wings outspread in this beautiful, almost, well, this very graceful gesture facing the sunshine. It's a gesture that to the human eye looks reverent, looks prayerful, looks sacred. And I would argue, in my mind, it is all of those things. It is also a behavioral adaptation to this job that the vulture has of cleaning up the environment. The sun, the sunshine, the rays of the sun are antibacterial. They are disinfecting by nature. And so the vulture, having engaged with these poisonous toxins in the carrion that they eat, go up to this high point, turn their bodies towards the sun, open up their wings, and allow the sun to help disinfect the outside of their bodies. And again, in doing so, they are neutralizing these toxins in the environment and rendering all of the parts of it available as energy for the next generation. And so over the years, as I've kind of shifted my attention from forms of spirituality that have us disconnect from the natural world to see ourselves as somehow above or transcendent of the natural world, and shifted towards forms of practice that embrace our role in the natural world, it's been an obvious outpouring of that I've become very attentive to the natural world itself as my greatest teacher. And pretty quickly in that process, my attention was called to the vulture, as I especially really began to dig into this aspect of human dis-ease, this disconnection from the cycles of life that is so present in our fear of death, our avoidance of even looking at or considering ourselves to be part of that cycle in that way. All of these toxic disruptions that we've built into our culture that turn away from death as an inevitable, yes, but truly beautiful and sacred part of our role in this world. For me, the vulture symbolizes the sacredness of turning towards that. All of the adaptations that the vulture has been given through evolutionary development to literally cleanse the earth of the toxins of death and to bring death back into something that is nourishing for the next round of life, it's remarkable. It's awe-inspiring. I mean, I hope it's awe-inspiring for you when you think about this. When I see them up in the air, high, riding the currents, spiraling, using their incredible sense of smell, another incredible adaptation. They have the strongest sense of smell in the animal kingdom to locate their food and to go to that task. Of course, each individual bird going to that task simply to feed its belly, to nourish its own life, to continue on its own existence. But in the larger scheme of things, holding this sacred role of cleansing the earth, of making it habitable for the next round of life. I work with a group of Reiki practitioners in a quarterly gathering where we discuss topics around grief and around death and the intersection of the system of Reiki with that place. And we've talked a lot about these themes and about the pain and the deep suffering that we experience by denying a space for grief and for death in our lives, that this is such a source of suffering for us. And in our last conversation, one of us brought up this aspect of our funerary processes that can be so damaging to the earth and that can disrupt our own participation in this cycle so strongly. And in that conversation, I just felt the presence of Vulture so strongly as a teacher, as a reminder, as a symbol to us for how beautiful it can be when we opt back in to the cycles of life. So all of that is the answer to the question of why would I tattoo an enormous vulture on my back? I feel deeply connected with this being. I feel in such deep gratitude for this being. And my relationship with the vulture is a constant reminder to me to check my arrogance as a human, to notice when I start to slip into that perspective that I am separate from nature, that I'm above nature, that the natural world is put there for our consumption, a collection of resources that are there for the taking, but never remembering that we ourselves are a resource that are meant to go back into the cycle. We can't opt out of that. And when we do, we cause great damage to ourselves, to the world, to our own hearts and minds, to our psyche. And we don't have to. We can choose a different way of being. We can remember our place in the circle of things. And we can look to the natural world to show us how to do that. So, my friends, I invite you today to take some time outside to be in the natural world as it presents itself to you wherever you are in the world. And just be open to noticing something in the natural world that wants to teach you something about the cycle of life, that wants to help you remember something that you may have forgotten about your place in the sacred cycles of things. Cultivate a mindset that the world around us is our greatest teacher and is our greatest guide back into health, into alignment, into peace and security within ourselves, to let go of suffering in the ways that humans so uniquely suffer. I invite you into that process. I invite you into it today and as a practice as you move forward. I would love to hear how that practice lands for you, what you've already experienced in your engagements with the natural world, what you've learned, the insights that you carry with you because of that sacred relationship. Please do share those with me down below. And as you go throughout the rest of your day, may you be deeply provisioned for that journey of deepening your relationship with the world. Until next time, thanks so much for being with me. I love you. Goodbye.